So this video is to kind of explain my mastering process. It generally follows this same method. However, yeah, depending on what plugins I'm interested in one week, these might change, but the general philosophy is kind of similar. So this is basically my a full like mastering session, maybe about an hour, that I'll kind of talk about everything I'm doing while I'm mastering and just try to explain why I'm doing it and what exactly I'm doing. So here is a file that I'm working on. It has no plugins. These plugins that are listed here are simply bypassed. But kind of the thing I tried to set up is the analyzer in span, and I use a 6 dB slope, which basically will model this line of brown noise. And here I'm kind of loading up the brown noise line, and you see it's just a flat line. And the 6 dB slope basically matches that flat line. And so this is before any mastering, and what you can kind of see is before I even get to any kind of mastering, I try to make it match this line as much as possible. Obviously, it's not exactly, but this is kind of my ballpark range that I want to go into mastering with. The final result is going to be different, but I think having this brown noise 6 dB slope is kind of a good starting point to later maybe boost the bass or the highs. But I think coming in at this kind of reference point for me is pretty good. So that's kind of what the mix looks like before any kind of mastering. In Voxengo, I also set it to center the analyzer, but I might change this later if it becomes difficult to view. So kind of the first plugin I usually always put in is the UAD Precision Multiband. And what I'm generally trying to do is just flatten the spectrum some more. I'm not trying to match anything. I'm simply just squashing things a little bit to make them kind of gel a bit better. But again, the general idea is I'm trying to just compress and push everything down to this like 6 dB slope. And you can maybe hear when I enable and disable each of these bands what it's actually doing. Bass sounds a little bit more like tighter. It doesn't kind of smudge across time. I mean, you can hear that the bass becomes a little bit tighter. It's probably difficult to hear, but I've gotten so kind of used to it that I kind of know what to listen for. So I'm basically going to go through each band and kind of just do the same thing. Just use my ear and see what actually sounds good. I won't try to compress it too much, but I'm generally looking for 3 to 6 dB compression, something like that for each band. And I do it solo. I solo each band first. I try to pick a range that sort of makes sense. Again, that's kind of listening by and kind of knowing that I have 5 bands and how much do I want to put in one band. So you hopefully you can hear that just adding those 2 band compressing, there's sort of like a bounce that gets added to it. Instead of just being like a wall of bass, there's the ducking is kind of emphasized, and the bass kind of depending on this release and attack time. I try to make it like follow the beat a little bit, and there is a little bit of kind of swing and a pump to it. So I know in this song there's a lot of kind of mid content, probably too much. So as I kind of work on this mid area, I will probably like compress it a bit more to like create a little bit of like scoop. Um, and again, I'm not really thinking about this 6 dB line, but I'm just taking every frequency range and just smashing it a little bit. And I know the end result is going to be a more flatter spectrum, even though I'm not trying to match the spectrum. I mean, especially if the gain reduction is similar across all bands, I know that I went in pretty close to this flat line anyway, so it's not going to really change much. Yeah, so hopefully you can hear also there's a bit of kind of a swing feel to it when this compressor kicks in. To me, compressing the highs is, I find it kind of more difficult than doing the bass. Maybe it's due to my lack of hearing, but again, I'm trying to like not overdo it, and I think in the highs, what really matters here is this attack. Like if I lower the attack too much, you can hear that the hats and everything become completely squashed. I just want to let enough in so I can actually hear those transients and but still get this sort of pumping feel that the compressor does. The reason why I'm soloing each of these frequencies is because I basically want every soloed range to sound good in isolation. And generally, if they sound pretty good in isolation, then I know it's going to sound okay when I mix them all together. So you can hear when I bring the attack down, it's pretty dramatic how much compression is being done. And when I enable and disable, like hopefully you do hear that it sounds a bit better, at least to my ear it does. It's almost like it's like missing something without without the compression. Okay, so you can see the end result that maybe the bass is not so much higher than the line, but it just sort of took the spectrum and made it a little bit closer to this line. And I think whenever you're doing this type of compression across all bands, it will generally end up the same way. So this mix knob that I'm turning, I'm basically doing a bypass to hear what it sounds like without the compression and with it. And now what I'll do at this point is add an AB plugin that will do like automatic gain compensation to listen to this before and after effects. You can see it's adding some gain, and I need to fix the latency, so I'm basically going to be updating this latency every time I add a new plugin. Hopefully you can hear already that the pre effects sounds a bit worse than the post effects. I'm going to be doing this pretty much after every plugin that I add to just kind of hear what the gain compensated difference is and whether it's making things better or worse. The next thing I usually add is BX Digital. I just got used to using this plugin so much that I generally like it. So this mono maker basically monos frequencies below whatever frequency I put here. It is something generally I do, not always, but I find it just tightens up the low end better. Maybe there are some, stereo frequencies in the low end that it cleans up a little bit. So I usually do this, but again, not always. What I'm doing now is just trying to configure span to show the stereo signal as well. Generally, I'm looking for that the sides aren't much louder, or they should be quieter than the mono. And there shouldn't be any kind of low frequencies on the side. Usually I try to avoid it. So yeah, this looks okay to me. I don't see anything too problematic. There's some resonance stuff around like 600, but it's not too bad. There's a high-res mode, which is sometimes useful for seeing the very low frequencies. And you can see that there's this kind of bump that comes in the low frequencies. I thought of maybe getting rid of that, but it's part of some sub-bass kit that only is at a certain time. So and it sounded okay, so I kept it. I didn't high pass it or anything like that. If there was a lot of stuff below 40 and 30, I would probably high pass it. But in this case, I don't. There isn't much going on there, so I don't. I'm just soloing it. And it's part of some kind of sub kick. But to me it sounds okay, so I keep it. And you can kind of see that it's coming even closer to the 6 dB slope, this flat line. But now I'm gonna actually EQ it to make it sound better. And generally I use this bass shift in Brainworks, which essentially does a kind of scoop in the 200s, 300s. Most songs actually have this, if you do any kind of analysis of them, and it generally sounds better. It's like, this is the boxy frequencies. And right now I'm basically just trying to find some good middle ground where I scoop out these frequencies without actually taking too much out. And the nice thing about Brainworks is it has a side section as well as a mono section, so I can kind of do things a little bit differently, which adds a little bit to kind of the stereo depth. But I'm looking for basically a good scoop and not too much. I think this is pretty hard because at some point you may take too much out. Comparing bypassed. Now I'll do post and pre-effects. Yeah, hopefully you can hear there's a big difference in that scoop and that boxiness. It essentially goes away. Next thing I'm kind of work on is I noticed that there's some high frequency stuff going on above 20,000, and this is because I use 48 kilohertz sample rate. So there's some frequencies above 20K that I essentially want to get rid of. And I'm using M-Dynamic EQ just to kind of use this low pass that it has. And just trying to find a good frequency while I look at the span spectrum to kind of, I basically want it to fall at 20K around. It can go a little bit over, but I don't want it too much over 20K. I think in general, like if there's a lot of stuff going on there, when you upload this to like SoundCloud and other places that will compress it, it may screw up the high end a little bit. So you'll see when I bypass it, a lot of stuff comes in above 20 kilohertz. So that's all I'm doing here is just getting rid of that. And also listening that it's not making any kind of like audible difference. Next thing I usually add is Gullfoss, and this is basically just a magic EQ that tries to kind of model typical spectrums of songs. Maybe it uses some AI or something, but I find it does a pretty good job. And this is basically kind of making it match typical like pop songs and what a general frequency range should look like in typical songs. And sometimes I see that it's kind of bumping up the highs a little bit too much, so I use this this red bar here to kind of limit it. Hopefully you can hear it does improve the sound a little bit. Here I'm loading in a spectrum of a Deadmau5 song just to kind of compare what mine looks like with this other song. And you can see in the deadmau5 song there's it's kind of a bigger scoop in this kind of mid frequencies. There's a bit more highs as well, but I'm not trying to match it completely. I just want to see that it is not like completely off base if I compare it. The only major difference is the highs here. I think maybe that song had a bit more highs, but to me it's not a huge deal. It's more of just a reference point that my spectrum kind of at least comes close to it. I don't really like matching EQs too much. I never found they actually sound good if I try to match something. Just maybe I don't know how to use them right, but they just never sounded good to me. I'm also not even listening to the loudest part of the song. The only thing I'm looking for is that it has all the drums and it has some of the kind of mid frequencies, but I'll check the other sections later. If I can make it sound good in one section, it's usually going to sound good in other sections. So comparing pre and post. Hopefully you can hear that. There's a big difference. Hopefully it sounds better. It does sound better to me. Next thing I kind of add is another sort of magic plugin that I really don't tune anything on it. It's the Ampex ATR 102. I find that no matter what, when I put it on, it just makes things sound better. Here's the bypass that I'm checking. Now what I'm doing here is Reaper has this way to check what the actual difference is that a plugin is doing. Sometimes it can give an idea what's going on with a plugin. Yeah, so I can hear that it's doing some maybe saturation to the low and the high frequencies, just kind of mixing that back in. So the next thing I'll do is just kind of finalizing the final things that I add are a clipper and a limiter. I use the clipper to kind of shave off some peaks, and this just makes the limiter not work so hard. You can get a little bit of more loudness this way and remove some pumping artifacts when the limiter comes in. Generally, you shouldn't hear anything that this is doing, because I don't want it to be noticeable what I'm actually clipping, and the gain that's being pushed is compensated with the output gain, so there's no volume changes happening. Yeah, so when I bypass, I shouldn't be able to notice any differences. What I'm doing here is I just really overdo it, just so I know what it sounds like when it's pushed too much, and then I just simply back it down to where I don't really hear this distortion. Usually it's around minus 2, minus 3 clipping, sometimes higher. Again, I'm just checking if anything has changed too much in the low frequencies. Sometimes the clipper might screw things up, so just double check that. here you can hear a big difference. But the old one almost sounds like shit. And here, what I'm doing is something nice that this clipper has is it lets you hear the differences of what it's actually removing. And as long as I don't hear too much going on there, then I know that the gain that I'm pushing it is okay. And here I'm kind of going to different sections of the song because other section might be louder or with like different instruments. I just want to make sure that they don't, with this R selected, I don't like hear instruments or anything like that, that I only hear kind of these short transients that are being removed. Next thing I'll do is the limiter. I almost always use Luxingo Elephant. I use this eval mode, and what the eval mode does is it compensates any gain, so it lets you hear if there's any issues or distortion happening if you push it too hard. And you'll kind of notice, even when I push it to the max, there really isn't, there's distortion, but it's not so much. And there isn't so much as because of all the other plugins I had before, and generally the kind of flattening of the spectrum, as well as the clipper, reduces this kind of final distortion that the limiter adds. So then I will bring it back to something more reasonable. I am looking at the loudness, but I'm also trying to listen for anything that sounds bad. And usually what I end up with is maybe 10, -10, or -11 left, something like that, before, if I go any further, to me it just sounds bad and I could hear some distortion and things like that. You kind of see here, I'm not, the gain reduction I want is minimal. I don't really want to go above minus, or go below -2, -3. I just want it a bit subtle. And again, the clipper really helps with this. And of course, I'm using what I think is the loudest part of this song when I do this final limiting. Yeah, so hopefully you can hear the difference pre and post. There should be a huge difference now. To me, a lot of the biggest difference is the kind of boxiness that is scooped out. There's some highs as well, and then, you know, again, there's other things like the bass is a bit tighter, etc. Next thing I'll add is Dynameter, just to kind of check. I use this kind of as a check of my work, and as long as it doesn't get red, I think I'm okay. I will basically play the whole song and watch this and see if there's any parts or any issues where it gets red. And when it gets red, that means that there's the dynamic range is low. And there's a target of 12 for YouTube, and you can see the minimum, it gets to 10. At some point it gets a little yellow. But to me, just looking at it right now, I think it looks fine. Probably in the chorus sections it will get a little bit more red. At this point I might listen to it a little bit louder. I'm usually doing mastering in headphones. I'll only at the end kind of listen to it in speakers. Again, comparing it to a deadmau5 song. Yeah, so to me it doesn't look too bad. If I were to have pushed the limiter and the clipper much harder, I would see kind of more red sections and the minimum going a bit lower. At this point there are some hi-hats in the song that I thought maybe were too loud. But I'm kind of too lazy to go back and fix it. At this point I will remove the ABLM plugins, lower the volume quite a bit because I turned off the evaluation. I removed Dynameter and I just add some kind of any kind of loudness analyzer, just again to just verify what the integrated loudness is. Usually Elephant is correct, but I just tried to use another meter as well. And LCast also shows it over time, which is sometimes useful. I'll then remove the LCast plugin and basically make a render. And I almost always use the same rendering settings, 32-bit, floating point, and 48K sample rate. I don't really use any dithering or anything like that. And what I'll usually do is I'll generate this and upload it to SoundCloud, hear what SoundCloud does to it, because that sometimes ruins what you upload. And maybe I might come back, make some changes or so. And the nice thing about Reaper is it shows you this integrated LUFS and some stats as it's rendering. That's pretty useful. And yeah, that's it. That's pretty much my mastering workflow. I sometimes take longer, sometimes shorter. Sometimes I just get annoyed so much with my music that I don't want to listen to it anymore, so I try to do this quickly, but hopefully it's useful.